in Lebanon in ecumenical dialogue and peacemaking. So we are trying to explore Lebanon and see how it can be useful and interesting for Ukraine. But from the very beginning, I would like to say that Lebanon, as well as Ukraine, has an incredible variety of traditions, of Christian denominations that coexist and cooperate, perhaps in creative tension, I would say. And also Lebanon is a country that has suffered a lot. And I think we can sympathize with this in our country, who also has undergone a lot of suffering and tensions. Lebanon is a country where churches are very much involved in the social, sometimes political life of their country. And I don't know whether it's a good or bad example for Ukraine, but it's something we can perhaps explore, whether the churches are involved to a right degree or too much or too little. To our speaker now, Antoine Fleifel is a doctor of theology, and he is a director of the Institute of the Christians of the East, which has been launched very recently, and perhaps nobody knows how much energy and effort Antoine put into making this institution work. Antoine is also a lecturer at Université Saint-Joseph of Beirut in Lebanon, and he cooperates with several institutes, both in Lebanon and in France. He will speak, I think, for around 20 minutes, and there will be a response from a Ukrainian side. Dr. Alfonsa Karapata is a Redemptorist nun who I think was the first Ukrainian to defend her doctoral thesis on theology in the Middle East, and she did it in Beirut. So she, and I see there is a Lebanese flag beneath her on the screen. So she speaks French and Arabic, and she is a bridge between Ukraine and Lebanon in this sense. And I think she is an ideal respondent to what Antoine has to say. So the floor is yours. I won't speak any longer. I would like also only to thank our partners from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and the Kharkiv office who are supporting this event, and to give the floor to Antoine. You're welcome.
Thanks a lot, Pavlo. Even though this day is very difficult, I am very happy to be with you. We have common projects, Institut Chrétien d'Orient and your institute, and maybe what I'm doing now, it's a preparation to the beautiful things we will be doing together in the future, and which will start the next month. So, dear Pavlo, you made the mistake, and you told me that I am free to speak whatever I want. And since I'm free to speak whatever I want, in the beginning, I wanted to prepare something about Lebanon, but I made a bigger project, and I want to talk about peace building and ecumenism in the Near East, not only in Lebanon. But why? Because we cannot understand what is happening in Lebanon without watching the big picture. And the second reason is that what is happening in Lebanon with Christians is also something which is happening everywhere else, in Syria, in Iraq. So whatever I'll be saying, Lebanon will be concerned, even if every context and every country has its own problems, but all of them share the situation in the Near East. I'm not talking about Middle East because it's very big for me. I won't go to Afghanistan and Pakistan or to Libya, but I'm talking to the Near East, about the Near East. So it's Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Jordani, Iraq, and Egypt. So Lebanon will be here all the time, and this conference will be about peace building and ecumenism in the Near East. And let me start by an introduction. An introduction which suits to the Middle East, to the Near East, excuse me, and to Lebanon. The Near East is a region ravaged by several wars. We do not have only one kind of war, several wars. Of course, the ugliest one is the military war. And since 10, 20, and 30 years, we're being watching these wars. The war in Syria, starting from 2011, the war in Iraq, we even forgot when it did start, since we had so many wars with Iran, with Kuwait, you know all the stories. In Egypt, problems since the 60s, the 70s, in Israel, Palestine. So this military war, and in Lebanon, of course, it's everywhere. But it's not the only war, because we have another war, which is the ideological war. And this ideological war, there are several enemies fighting since almost 2 centuries. When I speak about ideology, I think about the Arabism, I think about Zionism, I think about Islamism, I think about several kinds of nationalism. So you see, and the military war is linked to this ideological war. And we hear also about the ideology of the political Islam and the ideology of different kind of war. And I don't want to go into details. But there is also a third war which is going. It's a political war also. Every community, because we do not have a conscience of citizenship in the Near East. So every community wants the power to itself. And when I talk about communities, I talk at least about 2 kinds of communities. Religious communities, we can think about Shia, we can think about Alawism, but I also talk about old people that live there, like Kurds. So it's an ethnical war. And Kurds who wants freedom for them as Kurds and not as a religious group. So this Near East is ravaged by several wars. So we are fighting a lot of things. The nature of these wars is multiple, because this war first is a local war. We can go to countries and see how a group hate another group and they make war together against each other. There is another nature, which is the regional nature. This war is a war that engage big powers in the area, in the region, Turkey, Arabia Saudi, Iran. And the third level, or the third nature of this war, it's an international war, or international wars, which engage Russia, USA, France, and China. So, and that's not something new. This part of the world is being played by the great powers since the 18th century. And maybe you heard about what we call the Eastern question, or la question d'Orient. And this question is the question of how these big powers can take over this region. A century ago, the end of the First World War has drawn a new Near East, or even a new Middle East. We seem to be today in an era of reconfiguration, where construction of peace is not a luxury, because the human toll is particularly heavy in dead. wounded, and displaced. Not to mention, of course, the destruction not only of the private property, houses of people, but of structures and infrastructures in several countries. I'm talking about infrastructures, and here we'll need thousands of billions of dollars to reconstruct some countries, for example, like Syria. And when I'm talking about structures, I'm talking about political structures and state structures, which are today in a very bad situation. So what I'm talking about, is not very funny. It's even sad and alarming. But the big question, I have to ask now is, how can ecumenism contribute to the reconstruction of peace? Can ecumenism do something in this big scheme? Let us think together. I want to try to answer to this question through 2 points. And in my first point, I need to do an inventory. An inventory to understand a bit in more detail than in the introduction what is really happening. So if we are looking for peace building, that means that peace is not here. That means that we are in a context of wars, and I talk about it. So let's describe very quickly this context of wars in plural. So I talked about the military war. Let's see what's happening in this military action. This military action varies from a context to another. The war in Syria is not the same as the war in Iraq. And the military action in Palestine, especially in Gaza, is not the same of what's happening in Lebanon. So we have several problematics. But in all these problematics, military actions are causing a lot of damages. And let us see what are the damages of these military actions. First, this military action is creating a culture of hatred. Today, Sunni hate Shia, or a Christian can hate Muslim, or a Muslim hate the Jews. It's a culture of hatred because we do not see anymore the other as someone who can help me, who can build me, who can enrich me. The other is someone I have to kill because it's the enemy. Another consequence of these military actions is the collapse of societies. And today, if we go to all these countries, we see how societies are collapsing in more than a field. The field of culture, the field of going to the others, the field of looking to the future, everything is collapsing. And we are witnessing a creation of a culture of death. How many military action today are made in the name of killing the other, and also in saying that if we die, it's good because God's wanted. And I think that God wants life and he does not want death. So it's a culture of death also that is rising. So I was talking about military action, and I evoked the results or the consequences of this military action. But let us say that we have also another other problematics we have to evoke when talking about this military action, because all are linked. And the other thing I have to mention is the economic problems. So this peace building is not only stopping guns, it's also about economic. And we all know in geopolitics, economy and war are very tightly linked. The money, I don't know how we say it in English, l'argent est le nerf de la guerre. So money is the core of the war. Let us say it like that. So the economic problems today are determining factors. We cannot say, okay, we have military war and economic problems. When war started in Syria in 2011, okay, we see it's a problem of freedom. It's all what is happening in the region. But if we look at economy, we can see that in 2009 and 2010 and 2011, Syria had big economics problem. And we can see the same in Iraq and in Lebanon also today. Is war leading to economic problem, or economical problem is leading to war? I don't know. But what I know is that things are very linked. And also Egypt today. Egypt is a country with a lot of poor people. And when we want to understand how the Muslim Brotherhood could take power, we have to think about all these poor people who listened to Muslim Brotherhood and who told them, follow us and we'll have a better economy. So military and economics. And the third thing I want to mention is the religious ideological thoughts that are now in the Near East, in Lebanon, in Syria, and in all countries. And we can speak about several kinds of religious ideology. We can speak about political Islam, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and others. But we can speak also of religious Zionism, which in the occupied territory in Palestine, they are acting to redeem this country in a messianical way of thinking. And we have also to think about the Zionist evangelism. With Trump, they had a lot of power. Now with Biden, it's a bit different, but they are still strong in the lobbies and toward actions in Israel. So in this first point, I made an inventory. And in this inventory, I could understand that these wars that are happening in the Near East has different kind of nature, and that they are all linked. We cannot understand what's happening in Lebanon without seeing the big picture in the region. And now that we made the inventory, let us speak about my second point and evoke ecumenism as a way of salvation. It's not the way of salvation. The way of salvation is the Christ. but it's a way of salvation that can help us a lot. So, about all what I told you now, Christians are particularly affected for many reasons. First reasons, they are citizens of these countries. So everything what happens to this country happens to the Christians, They are not living as idols together. No. Like Muslims, like, I don't know, maybe Jews in Israel, they suffer from what is happening. But they suffer more for at least two reasons. The first reason is the reason of demographics, because they are lesser in number. Third of Lebanese are Christian. Today, 3% in Syria, 1% in Palestine, 2% in Israel, 8 to 10% in Egypt, less than 1% in Iraq. And these proportions change a lot. from several decades ago. Because in the beginning of the 20th century, almost the quarter of the Near East was Christian, and now it's only about 3 or 4%. So since the demographics of Christians in the Middle East or in the Near East are lesser, they suffer more, and we see it more. They suffer more as a community who has its integrity. But the other reason is the reason of power. Because if I put Lebanon aside, in all countries, Christians do not have power. But I don't mean power to be above the other, but power to have rights. They do not have this. And in Lebanon also, this country which was made for Christians 100 years ago, Christians do not have power like before. And it's not a mystery at all. Today, it's the Hezbollah who is making the politics of Lebanon. And that's also a big problem. But let us talk about ecumenism a bit. Ecumenism has made its way in the Near East for several decades. You maybe know the MECC, the Middle East Council of Churches. And this MECC played a very important role to make ecumenism a reality in the Middle East and in the Near East. All churches, family are member of this MECC. Catholic, Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestant, and even the churches of the two councils, I mean the Assyrian Church. But despite the action of the MECC, we have a lot of problems today on the level of ecumenism. Some of these problems are the expression of the international problems that we have now in the ecumenism. So what's happening worldwide is lived locally in Lebanon, but also we have difficulties locally. The ecumenism in the Middle East and in Lebanon is not at all in a good shape for international considerations, but also because of local considerations. And some of them are political, and that's very sad. So we have a lot to do on this level. But let me continue. It's true that ecumenism is a spiritual, theological, and ecclesiological reality. Why do we need to do ecumenism? Because the Lord asked us to do so. When he was praying to his Father, Gospel of St. John, let them be one as me and you are one. So every Christian has to follow this path and search for unity. Ecumenism is theological. And with the Second Council of Vatican, we know that we have to work in this direction. And it's ecclesiological also, because churches, they have to aim to build communion again, because they are separated, and the separation is a lack of charity and of love. So I think we can, all of us, we can be okay with this principle. However, ecumenism in the Middle East has a political dimension that many avoid. They are afraid to talk politics. They are afraid not to be in adequation with the message of the gospel. But it has a political dimension. Why? Because unity is not just a matter of one part of the human being. We cannot say that unity, ecumenism, it's only in the spiritual and in theological way. Unity is also everything that believers do in their countries and in their context. Christians in the Near East need unity to witness and to contribute together to effect changes. Because today, what are we saying? Christians must contribute to change the situation. But someone is deactivating my microphone, but I'm putting it again. It must be a conspiration. We love conspirations in the Middle East.
After all the
So
critiques
no
made,
community can do that alone. No Christian community can do this change, can effect a change. Either they weather the storm altogether, they go through the storm altogether, or each will die in their own corner, believing themselves to be the most beautiful and the truest. My church is so beautiful, yours is not so beautiful. So every church that thinks like this is wrong. But this unity of Christians, not only spiritual, but also political, gives them the possibility of being able to offer their culture's essential elements for building peace. When all community are united, they can offer this. And they all know the roadmap. And the roadmap is historical. Christian has been doing this for several centuries. This roadmap can be summed up in a few words: openness, diversity, education, service to society, human right and citizenship, and the freedom of conscience. These are the elements Christians always offer to the context of the different countries in the Near East, and this is what they need to do today, but all together in one voice, with the difference that, of course, everyone has in his own community. But this action, this roadmap, could only be effective if it's adopted by everyone locally and with the support of the diaspora, of Christians of the Middle East who lives in other countries everywhere in the world. So in the second point, to finish it, I'm saying that ecumenism can do something big in this part of the world, but ecumenism do not need to only concern theological and ecclesiological and spiritual matters, but all the human being in all his dimension, especially in his political dimension. And now, let me conclude. The situation is catastrophic. The road is long, but solutions are possible. What should be done in view of what has been mentioned? First of all, repent. Christians need to repent. And we all know that in ecumenism, working for unity starts with repenting. Christians, after repenting, need to have a comprehensive and critical view of the situation. And then they need to act. So they start with a spiritual attitude, then they think, then they act. And when they think, they do not think as entrepreneurs or as intellectuals who have ideas. They have to think as prophets who are convinced that the last word is for the word of God. This one which is fire and breathe, love and justice. This one which makes life out of death and calls for the creation of a new world of peace and freedom. And that's what I hope, and that's why I am committed to this action, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Antoine, for your very interesting presentation. I don't want to comment it since we have a opposite person to do that. Yes, Sister Alfonsa. I will just share in the chat 2 books that you wrote. They're in French, Le Dieu criminel, yes, the criminal gods, on religion and violence, and Géopolitique des chrétiens d'Orient, Geopolitica Chrześcijan Wschodu. I will put a link in the chat and maybe the link to the Institute of Christians of the East. And now I would like to give the floor to Sister Alfonsa, who will speak, I don't know, in Ukrainian, in English, whichever language she prefers. The microphone, будь ласка.
Я думаю, що я буду говорити українською мовою своєї
I think I will speak in Ukrainian from my Lebanon embassy. Well, first of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to Professor Antoine for his speculations, for his reflections, and of course to the organizers of this seminar for trusting me, for your faith in me, and for inviting me to participate in it. Professor Antoine outlined the complex panorama of the Middle East, of the Near East, and all the context with very special Oriental patience and passion. Of course, the situation is very complicated, very complex, but in the course of preparing for this meeting, for this seminar, and I was asking Professor Antoine about the text, about the upcoming text, and he said that he's going to speak from his heart. And I want to say that he succeeded not only to speak from his heart, but also to our hearts, because we are deeply touched. We are really worrying about this situation. I will tell you frankly, when this topic of peace building in Lebanon, as an example in Ukraine, was offered, I was really scared, because it's not easy to talk about the complex things. And I started thinking how particularly Lebanon can be an example for Ukraine. Lebanon that is now undergoing not the best pages of its history. And at certain moment, I wanted to concentrate on the no lessons, the wrong lessons that are not to be followed. And I could see that seeing Lebanon as the laboratory of peace building or peace message is not just, general populistic statements. It's also an expression of a deep expression of the Lebanon identity. John Paul II mentioned very much when he visited Lebanon that it's something more than a country. It's just a message. It's a message. This is the country that underwent very serious crisis, that was deeply wounded, but always with great experience. It's a country that knows how to build peace, not in post-conflict context. I don't know whether post-conflict context at all exists in the Middle East. It's not the case when you have past conflict and now let's sit down and discuss the conflict. It's the country that manages to find keys to solution of the conflict while having this conflict. And I think this is a good example for Ukraine. In order to play my role of a respondent, I would like to outline parallels between the peace-building experiences of Lebanon and Ukraine. And to do that, I need to be really, I have to be really humble, because I need to speak about peace-building processes in 2 countries. So despite huge crises, we can see attempts of peace-building and ecumenical ways in both countries. I ask the audience, please forgive me if my thoughts are too chaotic or sporadic and not ordered properly. I would like to start my reaction from a brief historical outline of Lebanon-Ukrainian relationships, because these two remote countries have long history of relations, religious and ecumenical kind. These relations fit directly into the peace-building processes that are marked with solidarity and mutual support between the churches. And I think that in this context, they deserve to be mentioned at least. I don't know whether we all are aware of it, but over 1,000 years, Ukraine and Lebanon are united by one saint, and venerating this saint is very significant. Armenian, Coptic, Catholic, Orthodox churches mention this. I mean Barbara. Barbara, who is originally from Lebanon, from contemporary Baalbek, and her body is in Kiev for a couple of centuries. So the Saint Barbara, present in Kiev, is a sign of spiritual connection with our Christian traditions of the East. Why do I mention this? Because her presence in Kiev Christianity is a way how we share our spiritual gifts. I will describe a 1,000 history of our relationship. But I also would like to mention Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky, who is the head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, who in the first half of the 20th century was heading our church and did even more. He was taking care of the people regardless of their confessional denomination, and he was very popular among the Orthodox Ukrainians. We know Andrei Sheptytsky as the one who took care of Ukrainians in the United States, in China, but very few know about his solidarity with the Orthodox and Catholic churches in the Middle East, Alexandria, Jerusalem, Antiochia. And I think this is an example of Metropolitan Sheptytsky, who, despite of taking care of his own people, also pays attention to the others' needs. In a very practical way, he is helping out in a very practical way. It's a great example that we should keep in mind today. Now let's go in the opposite direction. So not only Ukraine is helping out Middle East, I would like also to mention the reaction of the Eastern churches to the events of 1946. And in 1946, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was liquidated. It was banned, and the sisters churches of the Middle East were not silent. They sent letters to the communist regime and to grant us religious freedom. For me, it's a great manifestation of Christian love and taking care of us. I will mention the last sad event that deepened the already existing political crisis in Lebanon, which we also felt as Ukrainians when we it's the explosion in Beirut. And in this case, I could see how Ukrainians who have war in their own country, who have very similar political and economic problems, who are also fighting for their justice, for just courts, who are fighting corruption, just the same as Levan does. Still, they, in this need, I could see Ukrainians managed together. Ukrainian churches managed together and help. Of course, I would like to see our help more united, but even what our churches were doing separately was also impressive. Why do I mention these examples? On these examples, I want to make one conclusion. I want to drive to one conclusion that will be relevant to Ukrainian, Lebanon, or any other situation. If religion or confession played or still continue to play a role in enhancing conflict, then religion and the confession have a natural force to play a key role in peace building. Religious communities have a potential for making peace because this is in the nature of religion to to build peace, because we know that all the conflicts are not driven by religion as such, but they are driven by some bearers of religion, religious extremism or inconsistency with the moral norms and moral ideals should be marginalized. History shows that we are able to share spiritual gifts, that we are able to express solidarity with others in different difficult situations. If we do this towards each other, towards another country, moreover, we can do it within our own internal context. We also have the need for peace building, for establishing ecumenical relationships. Professor Fleyfel mentioned today briefly the Shiite community as the community that is now at power. It determines the political future of Lebanon. In this context, I want to mention someone, it's Shiite Semusi Sadra, sorry if I mispronounced, who lived during the civil war in Lebanon, and then he disappeared when he went to Libya. Why do I mention him? Because it seems to me that all our different religions and confessions have to look for some landmarks, to look at people who, under very critical situations, did not forget about the language of war, the language of love. So I think it was not accidental that it was a Shiite, because the necessity of Christians to be present in the Middle East was really, really stressed. And his belief that Christians have to be there, it was not just about tolerance. He could see it as a guarantee of peace and peaceful life and life in general. And the presence of Christians in Lebanon is part of the Lebanon identity. Without Christians, well, I know that Christians like to speak like this about themselves, and I know why they speak this way. They say that this is their identity, this is their land, and this is where they have to be. But I don't know whether Christian leaders or Christians are ready to say the same about the Muslims, because it's also their land and they also have right to live there. Of course, everything becomes relative. As Professor Fleifel said, there is different percentage and there is different quota when we talk about percentage quotas of Muslims and Christians. But to see how a Muslim would fight for Christians and defend them, and let's say go on a hunger strike for them, would fight together with Christians. That would be also something. I think it would be a great example. This is an example that should be a kind of landmark for us. You know, I also remember that with us, if we switch into Ukrainian context, after the events of 2014, after the Revolution of Dignity, when the annexation of Crimea began, I remember the behavior of the Muslim and Sunnite community behavior. They also offered their mosques for the Orthodox Christians of Crimea to be used. And I think in our confessional and interreligious tensions, we should speak about the others as a treasure. I think this is the task of any religion, of any confession. The others are not our hell, although Jean-Paul Sartre was of different opinion. I know a Ukrainian context. George Hodor, the representative of the Orthodox Church, is known to us not only due to his ecumenical relationship with Melchitic Church, but also because of his position and because of his idea of desacralization of violence. And he is also the voice not only for Antiochian Patriarchate, but also for the Middle East and for Ukraine. Generally speaking, if we take every religious community in the Middle East, we have to say that to foster the position of peace building is the task for for each of them. We are all capable of doing simple things that can lead us to peace building, to leave this ideological discourse. Of course, it depends whether I want to do it, whether I am willing. When I look at Lebanon and Ukraine, I can see a lot of parallels. I can see that both Lebanon citizens and Ukrainians, we don't want to fight. We don't want war. We've had already this experience. We don't want to suffer anymore. I can see, I will give a simple parallel between the Orange Revolution of 2004 and the CAD Revolution of 2005. We can see about the success. I can speak a lot about the successes, but in each of these cases, people who participated in these revolutions were struggling for peace, for justice. They were peaceful in their protest. Probably I have to finish already. I have run out of my time, I guess. I will only say that I will say about the successful examples of peace building and ecumenical patterns and how to borrow them. You know, when we talk about patterns, it's great to see some examples, some precedents, because they give us courage. They become a roadmap for us, but still we cannot always recreate them exactly in a different context. It's not always on time, it's not always in the right way, and not always successfully. So perhaps we have to take from Lebanon these messages of peace building, but it's not always so easy, and not everything is applicable to our Ukrainian context. Why has Lebanon gained this experience of ecumenic openness, and why is it so difficult for us to do it? I think because we have a completely different interconfessional situation. I'm not speaking about interreligious, but rather interconfessional situation. I think that ecumenism in Lebanon is the question of to be or not to be. It's the question of life and death. I think in Ukraine, this question is not that radically asked. And that's why, alas, we can still allow ourselves to have this long interconfessional conflict. Another thing I would like we should borrow from Lebanon is pastoral protocol of behavior. This is how I called it, pastoral protocol of behavior. I don't mean here the renovation of Eucharistic communion. Although after 11 years of Lebanon, I can say that I had communion in non-Catholic churches who accepted me as a nun, and they treated me to the communion. But in this pastoral protocol of behavior in the churches of Lebanon, they talk about the termination or seizure of any proselytism. I don't know whether Mr. Antoine will agree with me, but for me as a person from a different context, for me as a foreigner, it strikes my eye. As a nun of Greek Catholic Church, I had, during my time of living in Lebanon, I had experience of friendly communication with Orthodox Church monasteries. Unfortunately, I cannot boast with the same thing in Ukraine. It was a huge message that would lead us to certain reconciliation. I think this is something we should borrow, we should learn from Lebanon. Of course, Lebanon has not achieved all the ecumenical goals in celebrating Easter, for example, although Jordan has already, in terms of mixed marriages and so on and so forth, but still there are lots of positive examples that are probably critical for Ukraine. These are a couple of my thoughts that came spontaneously and I wanted to share with you. And at the end, I would like to wish both us and Lebanon and the Middle East in general not to give up and to find the necessary reforms as a response to each crisis. So blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called the sons of God. This is the mission of ours, to build this peace inside of each of us. Thank you for your attention.
Sister Alfonsa for her also passionate response, yes, to Antoine's paper, and for trying to yes, ask this question. Can we draw lessons or not, and to what extent? Now, we have 5 more minutes because we need to finish today at 6 o'clock Kyiv time. I have several questions which people have asked while they were making registration, but if there are live people who would like to ask something or comment, you are welcome to raise your hand and to speak briefly. If not, I will be reading my questions. So one of the questions was from Pavlo from the foundation Knowledge and Justice. So his question is about the lessons. Can we draw lessons, yes, from the Lebanese case, and how actually you can have a dialogue between people in conflicting areas, in people with conflicting views? I think it probably refers to the, yes, the context of the Donbass and where you have people with whom we don't really talk. So I don't know whether, Antoine, you would like to answer this. How can you have a dialogue between portions of people in conflict who have opposing views and are fighting? Yes, I think that both you and Sister Alfonsa have emphasized the fact that even when you are in the middle of conflict, you need to communicate, to have dialogue. For us, it looks a little bit unachievable. So what would be your advice on that?
My humble advice, Alfonsa said things that were very true. The context in Lebanon is not the same as in Ukraine. When Catholic and Orthodox speak in Lebanon, it's not the same problematic as when they try to speak, if they can speak, in Ukraine. And the way Christians community are in Lebanon, it's not the same also as in Ukraine. It's something different. The answer to this question is very complicated, because everything is complicated in the East, and especially in Lebanon. It has to be like this. But let's say that despite everything we see, we have a culture of meeting the different people. We do not have choice. This land is a land where different communities lived for centuries. It has always been like this. And these different communities, sometimes they speak and sometimes they make war. But we have also to understand something, that even in times of war, frontiers between communities are not binary, are not, you are here, I am there, you are east, I am west. You always find in all communities people that think differently and that want to talk. For example, during the war of Lebanon, we could maybe understand that Christians and Muslim hated each other, and Muslim are pro-Palestinian and Christian were pro-Occidental. But some Christians were pro-Palestinian and hated Occident, hated the West. And from the other way also, people were Christians, but they have a different kind of being Christian. So every time, in all circumstances, we always found a way to talk. But let's say that the political context is not the same as the one you're living in Donbass or in Ukraine. But we can say that another way of doing things is possible. The context in Lebanon can be inspired from what is happening in Ukraine, and the other way around. So that's what I can say for this question.
Yes, thank you very much, Antoine. Now, another question is from Roman Nebozhuk from the National Service of Ukraine for Ethnopolitics and Freedom of Conscience, which is, I think, a part of the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine. The question is how the Catholic Church can mediate in the conflict, and how Catholics and non-Catholics can play a role in the mediation in the moments of like military and political conflicts.
I can answer for Lebanon, but for Ukraine, I have nothing to say because I don't have the competence. But for Lebanon, what I can say about the Catholic Church is linked to the diplomacy of the Holy See, because the Holy See has toward the Middle East and all the region, they have a politic. And the politic is based on dialogue, on liberty of conscience, on peace building, on defending Christians, and on citizenship. And every time we have conflicts, so all the time in the Middle East, the Vatican diplomacy is there to help and to talk with all people. We saw that in Syria. In Syria, we didn't hear about what the Vatican is doing, but specialists can see such things, and they talk with all people from a side and from another, because they are looking for peace. And the Catholic Church, I think, in my humble opinion, is the church that is doing the most in the Middle East to help peace building. Why? Not because Catholics are more beautiful than Orthodox. We are all brothers. Every one of us has his own culture and his own richness. But because of the Holy See, the Holy See is a state. So they have a tradition of this, and they have a soft power to do it. So they intervene. That doesn't mean that Orthodox or Protestant don't do things, but the Holy See has some ways of doing things, and they are doing everything they can do, especially today for Lebanon. The Vatican is the first concerned of the future of Lebanon, more of any other country, and more than France, I think. But they do not have tanks, and they do not have weapons.
Якщо, Павле,
Yes.
можна? Я просто також хотіла б додати до цього питання.
I would like also to add something to this issue. For the last couple of years, I have been following the geography of Pope's traveling route. And you probably will agree that very often Pope travels to the East, to the Middle East. This is also a kind of response. He's traveling to the Middle East, to Israel, or to Emirates, or to Iraq, as far as I heard. I don't know how well I am informed and whether this information is confirmed, but I know that Pope is going to come to Lebanon. It will be Pope number 3 who will visit Lebanon, maybe in the nearest future. Another thing, I was witnessing that Catholicos of the Armenian Church offered one initiative to travel to Vatican for 3 days to pray for Lebanon, for the situation in the Middle East in general, in the Near East, because Lebanon is struggling with difficult situation, and other non-Catholic churches also should join this 3-day prayer. For me, it's very significant if we had these leaders of different churches praying together and discussing together with Pope the current situation in Lebanon. That's critical.
Thank you very much, Sister Alfonsa. Now, unfortunately, we need to close our webinar. Now, I would like to announce 2 things. First of all, 25th and 26th of November. So the next week, there will be a conference on Polish-German reconciliation, 1 day and a half. And I'm putting the link. You are welcome to join. It won't have English, it will have Ukrainian, Polish, and German, but still those of you who know those languages can join. And then another webinar of this series that we are conducting now will be on the 8th of December. It will be on the experience of the Balkans. You can find, you can use the same Zoom link that you used to connect today. It will be from 6 until 7 Kyiv time on the 8th of December, the Balkans, with Thomas Bremer from Münster University and Federation Nets from Kyiv. I am very grateful to Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their support. I'm very grateful to Helena Postashuk for translation. She made us capable of understanding each other. And I'm grateful to Oleg Banyo from Media Lviv, Marta Bilska, and our own Irene Kitura. And my special thanks go to Antoine Fleifel for his friendship and being with us, and to Sister Alfonsa. I'm wishing everybody a nice evening, and thank you. Thank you and goodbye. Merci beaucoup, Antoine.
Je t'en prie, merci à toi.
Merci.
Goodbye, everyone.
Merci.
And see you next month for some of you.
Thank you, Antoine.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you. Олеже, завершуй, будь ласка.